Hi there, welcome to Two Men Talking. I'm James Wilson.
And I'm Sean Purcell. And the idea of this podcast is to review books trending in key business leaders' best books they've read lists, and hopefully can inspire to make both your work and personal life a little bit better.
Very much, I like that. So this week, we're looking at the second part of a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And Cal Newport is an American computer scientist. He's written 6 books and he's got a blog called Study Hacks. And it's a really great book. So last week we looked at part 1, Sean, of the book.
Yeah. It really is a really nice, tightly written book. Part 1 was putting forward the case for deep work. The book broken into 2 bits. So it's about our ability to focus without distraction on cognitively demanding tasks. And he put forward the case that deep work's really valuable, but that deep work's pretty rare as well because of the way we live our lives. And as well as it being valuable, it also has meaningful, meaning we can get a lot out of living by adopting deep work practices. That's the summation of the first half.
Yeah, very much. So part 2, which we're going to talk about today, is his rules, and he's got 4 rules. Rule 1, which is work deeply. Rule 2, embrace boredom. Rule 3, quit social media. And Rule 4, drain the shallows. Some quite interesting ideas there. So Rule 1 on page 95, Sean, did you have any initial kind of thoughts on?
Well, he kind of kicked it off with a hypothetical architectural work environment which was designed so we can get as much value as possible out of our brains, where it was conducive to deep work. But as it was mentioned in the first half, it's pretty hard to do because our colleagues can't be neglected when they send us an email. We must respond quickly, and really we shouldn't be doing that. We should be getting into a kind of deep work state to produce really great results, but sadly we don't do that.
So I quite like the name of this architectural place. I don't know if I can say it, the eudaimonia machine.
Yeah, I don't know where he got the name from. It must mean something. Well, I think it does say in the book, it's the state in which you're achieving your full human potential. So the eudaimonia, that must be the term, if I've pronounced it right as well. It's a bit like when you're exercising, is it V-max? When you're at your V-max, you can't go any higher. Yeah. So I suppose this is V-max for the brain. So that's the aspiration. And it talks about how maybe we can achieve that aspiration. Okay. So the first one he talked about, I think on page 100, was add routines and rituals to your life. The point of this is, in life, when we're trying to do stuff, we often need willpower to do it. And we only have a finite amount of willpower, which gets worn out. Yeah. And if we can create a habit or a routine, I think the best example is getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth. People don't need to think about brushing their teeth. They just do it. And some of the work I do in professional education, I've just done some research for the ACCA and written some articles on this. And that's how to get people to study. That once they can get the habit of studying, they can become quite effective at it. And it's the same in doing deep work.
Okay. So on page 101, he's talking about your depth philosophy. And he says there's basically 2 different approaches. So on page 101, there's a guy called Donald Knuth. He's a computer scientist. And he says, what I do takes hours of studying and uninterruptible concentration. And then the other, so that's one approach. And this other guy called Brian Chappell basically just gets up at 5 o'clock every morning and works till 7:30 every day. And Cal Newport says both of these approaches are appropriate, but you've got to choose which one you want. Yeah. And what he's saying there is you need to choose a philosophy that fits your specific circumstances, as a mismatch can derail your deep work habit before it has a chance to solidify. I like that.
The other thing about that, Donald Knuth, was
go on.
I think we've said you can tell they're not kind of, maybe they're professors and maybe not commercial salespeople. Yeah. He's been a happy man ever since January the 1st, 1990, when he no longer had an email address. And he said he'd used email since 1975, so about 15 years, and he thought that was enough for a lifetime. And basically, he said email's wonderful for people whose role in life is to be on top of things, but not for me. My role is to be on the bottom of things. What I do takes hours of studying and uninterruptible concentration. Yeah. So yes, I get his point, but I think that might not be for everyone.
No, I get that. And there's a couple more examples out there. There's this science fiction writer called Neil Stephenson. Stevenson.
Yeah.
He said, if I organise my life in such a way I get lots of long, consecutive, uninterrupted time chunks, I can write novels. But as those chunks get separated and fragmented, my productivity as a novelist drops spectacularly.
Yeah.
So these people are kind of locking themselves away, really, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think the argument there was that, and the neuroscientists had booked that up, proved that, is that if you take 10 minutes out, you're not losing 10 minutes. You've got this like residual concentration lag that you can't pick up so quickly. So he's kind of an advocate. And we were saying last time, I think, about, does multitasking really work? And I'm not sure it does, using all the evidence here.
So I like it on page 106. He kind of develops this approach now. What he's calling it, and another approach, is the bimodal philosophy of deep working, which to me seems a bit more practical, because what he's saying there is you need to do chunks of deep work, but then deal with shallow work as well. And I think his example there is Carl Jung, who he again mentions in the first half. And Carl Jung liked to lock himself away in Switzerland, but he also used to go back to Zurich, and he was running a busy clinic at the same time, and he was seeing patients till late at night. And he liked to go to the coffee houses of Zurich as well. So he was doing a lot of deep work in one sense, but also he was getting himself involved in things. And I suppose that's the bimodal approach.
Yeah. It was. He when he did his deep work, it was uninterrupted, like locked away in a castle, wasn't it? The other quote I think in the chapter I quite liked was from Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld, the guy behind the Seinfeld show. Yeah. And he finds it really hard writing jokes. And what he does, when he's written it, he tries to write a joke every day. And once he's written that joke, he can put a cross on the calendar. Yeah. And again, that's creating habits. Yeah. It's like I think it's like what alcoholics do, where they count the days since they last had a drink. So you sit down in your AA meeting and says, "Hello, I'm Sean Purcell. It's now 573 days since I last had a drink, or since I last took heroin."
How's that going?
Yeah, it's not bad. But it's all about chains, about not breaking the chain. Yeah. And that's apparently, according to psychologists, a very powerful method of committing to things, because you don't want to break the chain once you start it. Yeah. So it's quite big in like fitness and writer. If you're trying to write a novel, you're supposed to write 500 words a day or something like that, I think, isn't it?
So on page 114, he's talking about the journalistic philosophy of deep work scheduling. And he's actually mentioned a guy called Walter Isaacson, who wrote the biography of Steve Jobs, which I really liked.
Okay.
And he's really interesting. But this Walter Isaacson guy could basically work anywhere. He was trained. He said at the bottom of page 115, he's saying journalists are trained to shift into writing mode on a moment's notice.
Yeah, interesting.
So that was another way of doing it as well. I think a lot of people might not be able to do that.
No, it comes with training. I think we'll talk later. It requires a bit of training, like your brain muscle can be done, but a journalist has obviously got a lot of experience of how to switch on and switch off.
Yeah. So then he's coming on to ritualizing on 117.
So that was, he's talking about a famous author switching from deep to shallow, and how to do that you need to practice it. Really, it's not something that is coming natural. And on the ritualizing, what were you going to say about the ritualizing?
Well, just that he mentions people having notebooks in certain places and having stuff on the wall and just being quite organized about it. And then he talks a little bit about Charles Darwin and how Charles Darwin used to like to go for a walk and whatever.
Yeah. So if you've got rituals and habits, you don't need willpower. And willpower, we've only got so much gas in the tank on the willpower. Yeah. And once it's used, then that's it. And so if you can avoid using that gas it just happens, it's better to do.
I like
the other ritualization, location. Yeah. So it's a bit, again, this can happen I know you can tell he's been a study hack advisor on his blog, because, if you're studying or if you're working, you go and sit in the boardroom, and that's deep time, but then your office door is open, or you're in that's sort of chat time. But he makes it very clear. And I think it sends a message to your brain when you go and sit on the red chair, it's time to work. And when you go and sit on the blue chair, it's maybe free time. Yeah.
So I quite like on page 121, he starts to talk about J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
She's writing the last Harry Potter book. She couldn't get stuff done at home, so she went to stay in a very expensive 5-star hotel called the Balmoral in Edinburgh. She did that because it forced her to do the work. Cal Newport calls this the grand gesture. So you investing in something makes you want to focus a bit more.
Yeah, you've put your money on it, so you want to get the most out of it. I mean, there was lots of people quoted doing that. Dan Pink and others, they bought expensive writing cabins to put into their garden. I don't think I'd fit a writing cabin in my garden. But that was therefore justifying them or making a lot. I've spent all this cash. I've got to get some return on it. And then there's another guy, Peter Shankman, who bought a 4,000 business class ticket to Tokyo and back just so he couldn't be interrupted, no distractions. And he's just spent $4,000. So he's got to get some return on investment of this $4,000. And he basically, is locked in a seat with nothing in front of him. To be honest, if I'm watching films and drinking wine, so that's not really good for me. That's what he did, and he achieved a lot by doing that. So yeah, interesting.
So the next section of the book is on relationship working and collaboration, which I didn't really float my boat, a lot of this, really.
You know what? I didn't really make many notes on that part of the book, so similarly didn't float my boat.
I don't think that was the point of the book, really. But he's talking about working with other people and hub and spoke stuff. What he did, I suppose what was interesting, on page 133, he mentions this concept of the whiteboard effect. And what he's saying is, if you do work with someone else, you need to kind of bounce off each other. And one person says one thing, and then they both consider it, and then collaborate together. So I quite like that.
I agree with the sentiment, but I didn't really thought that fitted into the rest of the book sentiment.
Yeah.
It was like a little anecdotal bit in the middle there. I mean, I agree. I think, it's much harder being in business on your own than if you've got two trusted partners who each can act as devil's advocate for your view and you for their view. But I didn't think that fitted into work deeply. Okay. I mean, the next thing I thought, when he talked about going on to 138, 139, about keeping a scoreboard. Yeah. So just being accountable.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And that's part of the 4 disciplines of execution.
Yeah.
That was interesting because it was written by a guy called Clayton Christensen.
Yeah, Clayton Christensen is he's a Harvard professor that is quite a well-known author. And he's a bit like Stephen Covey in the way he has principles of living. I think there are I think Stephen Covey and Christensen, they were both Mormons. And there's ways of living amongst the Mormon religion that they all observe. And it's just how to live your life quite well. So, he said he could work till midnight, but he left at 6 o'clock so he could spend time with his wife and his family, and then spend some time on charity work, and so all quite good ways to live your life. But he was accountable to that structured way of living. He didn't let it drag on.
So then he moves on to 142, to this idea of being lazy.
Being lazy, yeah.
and using inactivity to recharge yourself and refocus.
Yeah, and that's again backed up by science, where you can wire your brain up to some MRI scanner and turn your computer off, and talked about the conscious and the unconscious mind and power of downtime. Yeah. Downtime helps recharge the energy needed to work deeply. So, if you're going to work 16 hours a day, well, it's great. But I know some of these people who wear it as a badge of honor, some of these corporate finance lawyers, and says, oh yeah, we work 72 hours straight on that. And is that good? I'd say, if a doctor said to me he's going to operate on one of my kids and he's just been working for 72 hours, I'd say, mate, go home and have a sleep before you touch my kid. Yeah, it seems okay with these corporate finance lawyers, and yet they're doing billion-dollar deals on no sleep. It can't be good, I don't think. I don't know how that really complements deep work, but it's a bit of a macho thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
So, give yourself time off. So basically, again, if you're working all the time, I think he goes on to about 148, talking about this fuel tank of motivation, willpower. Yeah. And if by having some time off, you replenish it because it gets worn out. Well, and I think he gave a scientific evaluation of walking in the country and walking in a city. And walking in a city, you've got to watch out for taxis running you over and courier cyclists running you over. But in the country, just listen to the birds. You were just telling me you've got something to help you relax, James, where you put this thing on your head. That was quite an interesting little anecdote here.
I've got my Muse, which I can't show you because it's a podcast, but I've got this little device that you put around your head, and then you hook it up to your phone, and it reads your brain waves, and the calmer you're feeling, the more birds you hear. Yeah.
So it's training your brain. So you're doing a bit of brain training, basically. Yeah. Trying to get yourself into a zen-like state.
I like to lie on my acupuncture mat and listen to birds.
Yeah. What, like Philip Schofield in that We Buy Any Car advert with the goat on? And then at the end of this, he talks about the shutdown ritual.
Oh, yeah, I like this.
Go on, tell us about the shutdown ritual.
So the ritual should ensure that every incomplete task, goal or project has been reviewed, and that for each you have a confirmed that either, one, you have a plan you trust for its completion, or two, it's captured in a place where it will be revisited when the time is right. I really like that.
Yeah, I did as well, because I don't think we all do that. We just like rush out with all loose ends. And
I like his set phrase he has to say to himself, which is "shut down complete." I like that.
No, I liked it as well. Thought it was good.
That ritual thing again, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's all based on psychological little shortcuts to getting things done, really. Next chapter then talked about embracing boredom.
Yeah.
What was your take on this one?
So he talks about these Jewish guys who like to kind of memorize and decipher the Talmud each day. What he said, his kind of conclusion there is that you've got to have daily mental practice.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing about mindfulness. There's something on Spotify, I think. I've forgotten the name of the application. If you just buy a Spotify for one person, you can do this Headspace. I think it's called Headspace, which is kind of little thing you do every day. It's a bit like, going for a run every day. Just do a bit of, as well as physical exercise, do a bit of mental exercise. Yeah. And it was basically talking about strengthening your mental muscle on 157. So, to concentrate intensely is a skill that must be trained. Sounds obvious, but a lot of us don't do it. And I think that's when you go and become a monk, they can get their heart rate down to 45 beats a minute or something, can't they? They're really Zen-like monks, but it takes years of meditation to do that. It's a practice thing, so you have to train your brain, basically. It's a muscle like everybody else, or everything else. The next thing I picked up was about 159, where it said, don't take breaks from distraction, take breaks from focus. And it was basically saying, once you're wired for distraction, you crave it.
Yeah, I really like this.
Really doesn't like distraction, which I completely get.
No, he's talking about restricting your access to the internet, isn't he? They say schedule in advance when you'll use the internet and then avoid it altogether outside those times.
Yeah, and he's talking about an internet Sabbath, didn't he?
An internet Sabbath, And then on 162, he's going into, you can even do this if your job requires you to use the internet a lot or lots of emails. It's about blocking. You can block little bits of time, like 15 minutes or whatever, but it goes to that thing about, what's the word, disciplining yourself.
Yeah, and I think we can do. I think I definitely recognize some people who adopt these principles because they respond to their email at a certain time of the day. Even I'm conditioned to people responding quickly, but why? I don't need it urgently. And once you actually understand that's how people respond, you probably arrange your own behavior accordingly.
Yeah, okay.
But basically, he talks about, I think on 164, that scheduling internet use at home as well as work can improve your concentration training. And we, a bit worried about the youth of today, as we were saying, like a couple of old fellas, with the kids glued to their smartphone throughout evenings and weeks. I mean, even at concerts, I see it. It's like, you're not watching the concert. They're more interested in sharing the concert than watching it. And then after the other thing I thought was quite good was where on 166, work like Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, I like this.
Who I didn't realise he was a pretty busy person. He was a boxer, a wrestler, a bodybuilder, a poetry reader, and I had a lifelong obsession with naturalism. I didn't know any of that. And then he ran all kinds of extracurricular stuff at Harvard, but then most people wouldn't have any time to study, but he managed to, because he developed a really good regime, and he'd begin his schedule by considering 8 hours from 8:30 to 4:30, and he'd remove the time spent in classes, his athletic training and everything else, and then what was left, they had to add value. So there was no fluff time. It was boom, he was on it. I think I said I've seen this with some like mums in the school playground with my kids, and I think the adage is, if you want to get something done, find a busy person, because a busy person is normally really capable of giving a great 15 minutes to something rather than someone who's not busy, just not trained in that mindset.
Yeah, very much. So 169, he moves on to this idea of meditating productively. And what he's saying there is that he's talking about he used to walk a lot, and he used to use his time walking to go through problems he was trying to solve and issues he had, which I liked.
I like that. He engineered meditation time, didn't he? So he didn't go on the subway or he didn't go in the car, he walked, and that gave him time to think about it. So if you're doing exercise, or you can put your brain calming headphones on when you're cooking or something, you can multitask if it's something you're aware of what you're doing. So productive meditation he was talking about, and I think that's a bit linked to what we said about mindfulness, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the bit I quite liked after that I've read the books he refers to, where he talks about on page 174, memorizing a deck of cards.
Memorizing a deck of cards, okay.
And he quotes a book, Moonwalking with Einstein, which was a bestseller in 2011. And basically it was a guy who showed that we've all got the same brains as everyone else, and the way in which we can get the most out of them is practice these techniques.
Yeah.
And the guy, Robert Winston, does a bit of this as well when he's done some BBC series. People who memorize 3 decks of cards in 60 seconds, but they have a pretty structured technique where they put all the cards in different parts of each room in their house. And we already, they really focus on every little nuance in their front room and their hallway. So you already know where those places are. And it's just it's a little brain hack to remember things. Your brain is a muscle that can be toned and structured how you want it.
Yeah, I like that one.
No, I thought it was good. That kind of follows on till the end of that chapter, really, about memory techniques and how they work.
I like this last sentence of that chapter too. It says, your ability to concentrate is only as strong as your commitment to train concentration.
Yeah, exactly. It's good. Really, it definitely, not many books make me change. We'll keep talking and we'll maybe reflect on what we've done in the few days since reading this book. So it has had an impact on us.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so rule 3 is quit social media. I quite like this one. I
did as well. There's almost, I think in the first section we talked about last week, where employees were encouraged to tweet. And it's like, what are you tweeting about? Is that helping you achieve a better job in what you're employed to do? And I don't think it really was. So he basically just hacks your brain, and we all get it when we see an email, and we get drawn into that email, and our concentration's shot.
Yeah. So I like the way he's on page 183.
Yeah.
He talks about at the top. He talks about social media as a network. Going back to that idea of taking a break from these network tools that might be available to you. So as he's going through, he talks about people who've given up social media completely, and then he says about halfway down 184, he says there is a middle ground, that you don't have to give up everything. And then he says what you need to understand first is the current default decision-making process deployed by most internet users. And he's sort of saying here that people can take an any benefit mindset. And what he means by that is the any benefit approach to network tool selection is you're justified in using a network tool if you can identify any possible benefit to its use or anything you might possibly miss out on if you don't use it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting because he's talking about historically craftspeople had access to tools, but they didn't just use any tool. They'd use the tools that were useful for them. And he says, I know you like this bit, he says, he's talking about the internet and how, as he said in part 1, how just because it's to do with the internet, it's a good thing. And that might not necessarily be the case. And he said, if you don't go along with things, you can be seen as a Luddite curmudgeon.
Yeah, I did like that bit because I didn't know Americans knew the word Luddite.
Yeah.
Luddites were people from Huddersfield when the Industrial Revolution was going on, and they broke into cotton mills at night and smashed the machines up. It's like a classic way of not how to manage change, because these mill owners, there would be a mill and there would be a town, and everyone in the town worked in the mill, and they would bring a machine under the cover of darkness and cover a tarpaulin in the backyard, and everyone says, it's going to take our jobs away. So there was a bunch of Huddersfield terrorists, for want of a better word, who would break in with sledgehammers and smash it all up, and that was a Luddite. And I thought, gosh, does that word actually got outside of the UK? But obviously it has.
Yeah,
interesting, very rich. And
I really like the next bit on page 188.
Was that about where he talks about don't get a hay baler? Yeah, so he's basically talking about using time efficiently. And I was saying to James, probably a bit of a cheapskate sometimes, and I'm doing a bit of painting and decorating. It takes me all day to do it, and I could get a painter and decorator through people I know for £100 a day. That's really good. And I'm thinking, I'm spending a day and a half for what is an opportunity cost of £100. What am I playing at? I should be using that time to earn more than £100. So that's what he's basically saying. Use your time efficiently. And he was talking about, wasn't he keeping cows or horses or something? I can't remember.
The farmer was, he said,
he was growing his own hay, and he said, look, it takes a lot of time. You have to bale it, you have to store it. Just buy hay off the shelf and use the time. He used the time to keep chickens, where he could make more money on chickens than growing hay and baling it. And also he got fertilizer out of the chickens for his fields, which again was a positive outcome as opposed to not having one. So only do things which work for you in a positive way, I think.
So I quite like the definition on 191. He said, the craftsman's approach to tool selection. Identify the core factors that determine success and happiness in your professional and personal life. Adopt a tool only if it positively impacts on these factors only if its positive impact substantially outweigh its negative impact.
Yeah.
I thought that was really good.
No, I thought it was great. And it's about prioritizing things in life, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
About what's important and is what you're doing relevant to that. And some work I do with finance people, they produce all these reports and I'll say to them, so this is your strategy, this is your outcome. So how does that report help it? And he says, well, it doesn't really. He says, well, what are you spending time on that report for?
Yeah.
It's a waste of time.
Doing it because that's what you've always done.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of very similar to what the craftsman approach to tool selection is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great anecdote. But the next thing is 194, 195.
Yeah.
Not using Twitter, because does it actually link to your strategic outcomes? And if it doesn't, well, what are you using it for? So again, it was quitting social media. If you must use social media, does it actually complement where you want to go and where you want to be? And if it doesn't, what you're wasting time on it for? Because it is quite energy sapping having to do all that.
Do you tweet a lot, Sean?
Not really. I have an account and I get tweets from people. I get tweets from all kinds of weird people like, well, you don't want to know. But I don't know why I've been profiled that way. I don't get tweets from like business people. I get tweets from Colleen Rooney and rubbish like that. It's like, what the heck have I got a tweet from Colleen Rooney?
Someone's been hacking you, maybe.
I don't quite understand it, but yeah, it's kind of, I do it because everyone has their way of communicating. And in my maybe naive way, I think you might just have to put your message out on multiple media because not everyone's on the same media. So that's my thought process. Whether that's correct or not, I've not done any analytics with regards to it, but maybe I should.
Okay, where are we going next?
Well, I then whizzed off to about page 200, where, again, it's backing up what we've said. He was talking about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 in goal achievement. 80% of what we achieve is often the result of 20% of the cause.
Yeah.
80% of sales are from 20% of your customers. So why are you not spending most of your time on those 20% customers?
I like that.
Yeah. He talked about on page 209 not to use the internet to entertain yourself.
Yeah.
He just thought that's not a great thing to do.
I like what he says about the social media. He said these social media services, they're just products developed by private companies, funded lavishly, marketed carefully, and designed ultimately to capture, then sell your personal information and attention to advertisers.
I mean, they're quite clever. You see these things like, you wouldn't believe what Ray Clements looks like now. Yeah. And you think, well, I wonder what he does look like now. So you click on it and I give up. I never get to Ray Clements because I give up after about 12 photographs with all clever arrows all on the screen, which are obviously little mind to take you down a rabbit hole to some advertising space. Quite clever the way they do it. If you read anything like the Times or the Guardian or anything online, they've got all these little bits all around it, which obviously they make money on.
Okay.
So yeah, rubbish. So also another thing on that was put more thought. This is going on to 212. Don't waste your time on the internet. If you must go, as you said earlier, go at a certain time. But he says put more thought into your leisure time to avoid addictive websites, structured hobbies, set programs for reading. And I mean, one thing this podcast has made me do is actually put time in to read, which I think I've benefited from. I think it's a good thing.
Enjoyed it, haven't we?
I have enjoyed it, but I think had we not had this commitment, because I haven't got a target and something in the diary, I would have just kicked it into the long grass and done it sometime. So again, the whole habit thing is not a bad thing to embrace. So that was it really in that chapter. If you want to eliminate the addictive pull of the entertainment sites, give your brain a quality alternative. Not only will this preserve your ability to resist distraction and concentrate, but you might even fulfill Arnold Bennett's ambitious goal of experiencing, perhaps for the first time, what it means to live and not just exist.
Yeah.
And, if we make time for great hobbies, you can get a lot of benefit out of that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I thought it was a great quote at the end.
Okay, so rule 4 is drain the shallows.
Drain the shallows, yes. It was talking about here how someone moved from a 5 to a 4-day week.
People who do base camp.
Yeah, it used to be called 37 Signals. It's now called base camp. And everyone said, well, you can't do that. You'll just be rushing. But actually, you weren't rushing because once people have less time to do things, they become stingy with their time.
Yeah.
And when you have fewer hours, you spend them more wisely. It's a bit like what the J.K. Rowling thing was. When you're spending $1,000 on a hotel room, I want to get the most out of it.
Yeah.
These people are just as productive, but they only work for 4 days as opposed to 5.
So I liked at the bottom of 217, that company, Basecamp, gave its employees the entire month of June off to work deeply on their own projects.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the month, they held a pitch day when the employees pitched the ideas that they'd been working on. And they actually came up with 2 new projects.
Yeah.
Which I thought was amazing.
No, I thought it was amazing because there's something similar in 3M where they do 20% of their revenue must come from products that weren't a year old, and they give them a day a week to think about it. And I think Google, you only work 4 days on your job at Google, you work another day on something else. But what was interesting here was in Google and in 3M, it's just 1 day. Here they gave them a whole month to think. If you give someone a concentrated month, it might might sound indulgent, but actually they got quite a lot out of it. So Drain the Shallows, it's about get rid of shallow work. And shallow work is all surfing the internet, dealing with emails, all that nonsense meetings. And I thought on page 221 there was a great quote, and he said, treat shallow work with suspicion because its damage is often vastly underestimated and its importance vastly overestimated.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, I did. And then he goes on about how to rid ourselves of shallow work.
Go on.
But both James and I have actually done this. He says block every 30 minutes of your day. I think I've blocked every hour of my day. I'm halfway there. But it has made me change. Quite inspirational, really. And that's just after reading the book a few days ago.
Yeah, I liked it. And he talks about how if you do it in the morning, then inevitably you're going to get pushed off course. But that you keep changing the schedule to accommodate any changes in the day. Yeah,
so if it goes from an hour to 50 minutes, you squeeze more juice out of that 50 minutes. And I imagine if you get accomplished at that, you'll become even better at squeezing the juice out of it. You know, that's a bit like Kaizen, where they improve processes. And you work your guts out and you've done it. And it's just, God, I don't want to do that again. And they say, well, yeah, you do. You've got to get 10% off next year. And it's like, well, how can I do that? Well, if you get into that mindset, you never achieve it. So yeah, great. I thought it was really good. And it basically, he then goes, following that argument on 227, is that without structure, it's easy to allow your time to devolve into the shallows, email, social media, web surfing. You know, there's almost a business idea there for someone to buy an hour of internet a day, and you've got to get the most out of it in that hour. I know that's not the whole point of the internet, but it would be quite beneficial, wouldn't it, really?
Yeah. On 228, talking about quantifying the depth of every activity. What he's saying is the advantage to scheduling your day is that you can determine how much time you're actually spending in shallow activities.
Yeah.
And then he goes through a couple of examples. They didn't really float my boat. He's talking about emails and
PowerPoint presentations and stuff, isn't he? Yeah. But again, I think we were talking about outsourcing stuff. I mean, that's along the lines of outsourcing. You take some of the things that aren't adding much value off your plate and outsource it to someone to do it for you. I suppose like your painting and decorating, but also things in the workplace.
I liked it on 232. He says, ask your boss for a shallow work budget.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that conversation.
Yeah. How much time can I have for dossing around on pointless, needless activities? You wouldn't get much, would you? But it's tolerated because you've got to respond to your email in 5 minutes or whatever, else you're not busy.
Yeah.
The other thing I really liked, which was again part of the focus of you, less you sometimes get more done, is on page 236 where he says finish work by 5:30.
Yeah.
And how people just become more productive. It's a bit like you cut your coat by the cloth you have.
Yeah.
So if you don't get much cloth, you can still make a good coat, but you know.
What resonated with me here was that Stephen Covey thing about start with the end in mind.
Yes, exactly.
Quite similar, isn't it?
It's similar, but it's like what all good businesses should do. You should have really articulated your strategy, where you want to go, and everything you do should be in that strategic direction. And if it's not, well, don't do it.
It goes a bit too much about professors, I think.
I'm not sure it would be that commercially acceptable. I think on 242, he's talked about becoming hard to reach and just the tyranny of email. And this is what Cal Newport does. I mean, it might be interpreted in different ways. 243 says, on his email response, he goes, if you have an offer, opportunity or introduction that might make my life more interesting, email me at this address. For the reasons stated above, I'll only respond to those proposals that are a good match for my schedule and interests. So it's like, God, get you, mate. Who do you think you are? He called it a sender filter.
Yeah.
So he asks people, rather than just to say, what do you think? The correspondents have to really filter what they want to say before communicating with them.
Yeah.
It saves you a lot of time. There's one company I do some work with. They copy everyone in on every email. There must be like 30 names. And I don't even know who some of these names are.
Yeah.
And it's my message. I'm talking about it. It's like all those people are going to open that email. It takes all of those people 5 minutes. It's just a waste of time.
I liked on 246, there's a guy, what's his name? Clay Herbert. And he says on his website, he doesn't have his email address. First of all, to contact him, you must consult a frequently asked questions section to make sure the question not already been answered. And then if you make it past that, you've then got to fill out a survey that allows him to further screen you. And then if you get past that, he actually charges you a small fee that you've got to pay him before you can send him an email.
He must have something good to give, old Clay Herbert, but good luck to him.
I like that.
Then he had a few ideas on email strategies so you don't do email ping pong. You respond and say, yes, can you do 10 o'clock Friday morning? Boom. It's very cut and dry. Or I can do 10 o'clock Friday morning, or apologies, I can only then do Tuesday at 9, or else I can't do it. And it puts the ball in their court, and if they really want to speak to you, that's what they'll do.
Yeah.
So he talked about, was it process-centric responses rather than just, oh, well, when are you free and when are you free? Blah, blah, blah. And then I think 255 was the final thing that got it for me, which was the Tim Ferriss quote.
I love this. Go on.
Yeah, and he says, develop the habit of letting small bad things happen. If you don't, you'll never find time for life-changing big things. So what do you think about that one, James?
So he's talking there about sometimes maybe not replying to emails. You might hack someone off that you haven't replied to their email, but you're just cracking on with life and not getting involved in stuff.
Yeah,
I really like Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, I like Tim Ferriss. Well, he speaks a lot of sense, and obviously that's what he does, and he's done all right as a result of that behaviour.
Yeah. Okay.
So, in conclusion, I don't know. Did you? I didn't make any. What do you think? Anything about the conclusion? I didn't. To be honest, I didn't read the conclusion.
It's very honest of you. He talks a bit about how Bill Gates set up Microsoft. Bill Gates was so obsessed with writing this bit of code. He was writing BASIC, I think. That he used to collapse at his desk and he'd wake up again 2 hours later and just carry on. Like he created $1 billion industry in less than a term because he just got the thing done. So that was good.
But even Bill Gates would have those weeks, wouldn't he? He has a week away where he switches off from everything to recharge his brain. So despite doing that crazy work, he does allow his brain to be recharged by taking a week off and reading 20 books or whatever he does. I'm pleasantly surprised. I've had that book on my shelf, meaning to read it, right, and haven't read it. And you said, let's read that one, because it just happened to be on my shelf as I looked across. And fantastic. I really enjoy. I hope the other books we're going to talk about are as influential as that. I think we showed each other we have been putting our days into hours. I've been trying to get off the internet slowly. I might have to go for some counselling on that one, but I'm trying.
I deleted Facebook and Instagram off my phone.
Did you?
Yeah. And Twitter, actually, on Twitter.
Wow. So there you go. Read the book. I think, we won't say that about every book. Well, I hope we do, but I don't imagine we will. It was pretty inspiring, I would say, James. And I would say it's a good read. It's a good read, whoever you are in life. A lot of life is just drained away into meaningless nonsense that we can free up lots of time. It's an interesting one. If you had a year to live, would you do half of the things you do? You probably wouldn't. People who have a year to live fantastic lives in that year. Why can't we live a life like that for the whole of our lives? And that's kind of a lot of the things in here will help you do that. That doesn't sound too profound.
No, I like that. And it might be a book that you'd want to go back to every year or something. So
I was pleased about that one. So
deep work. Read it.
Enjoyed it.
Okay.
Nice chatting, James.
All right, nice to talk to you.
All the best, mate.
Bye.